I never thought a scream like that could come from under my own porch. It was just after 6 in the morning. The sun was barely up, lights spilling through the pine trees beyond my backyard. I opened the door to let in some fresh air, and that's when I heard it. A thin, broken cry. Weak. Desperate. I froze for a second, thinking maybe it was a raccoon stuck under the boards again, but this sounded different. There was pain in it. And fear. I stepped out onto the porch in my sweatpants and boots, rubbing sleep from my eyes. The boards creaked under me as I walked to the edge and knelt down to look underneath. That's when I saw her. A massive lynx lay half in shadow, half in morning light, her fur matted with blood along her side. Her breathing was ragged and shallow, her yellow eyes half closed. I felt my chest tighten with something between terror and awe. I had seen lynx out here before, but never this close, never like this. Then I noticed the tiny shape curled against her belly. A cub, no bigger than a house cat, with wide blue eyes and ears tipped in black. The cub mewed again, a soft, pathetic sound, then pressed its nose into its mother's fur. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat. The mother lifted her head weakly, her gaze locking onto mine. For a second, I thought she would snarl or lunge. Instead, she did something I will never forget for as long as I live. With a trembling paw, she nudged her cub away from her body, closer toward me. She pushed again, the effort making her flinch with pain. The cub stumbled forward a few inches onto the dirt, looking confused, then turned back to its mother with a frightened squeak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I whispered without thinking, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The mother's breathing grew harsher. Each inhale sounded like gravel in her lungs. Blood seeped slower now from a gash along her ribcage. She blinked at me, heavy and slow, then pushed the cub again, her paw shaking. Her eyes never left mine. It felt like she was telling me something, pleading, trusting me with the one thing she had left in this world. I swallowed hard and looked around. My yard was silent. The morning air was crisp and cold against my skin. The cub took a hesitant step toward me, then sat down, mewing pitifully. I didn't think. I just acted. I crawled forward on my stomach, inch by inch, until I was close enough to see the steam rising off the mother's wounds. She didn't flinch when I reached out my hand, palm down, fingers spread in the dirt. The cub sniffed my fingertips, then pressed its nose against my thumb. Its fur was unbelievably soft. I could feel it shaking. The mother let out a long, rattling sigh. Her eyes flickered shut for a moment, then opened again. She looked at her cub, then at me. There was no hate in her eyes, no fear, only exhaustion, and something deeper, a resignation I didn't want to understand. I whispered again, "I'll take care of your baby. I promise." Her eyelids drooped. Her breathing grew quieter, each rise of her chest shallower than the last. She pressed her nose into the cub's side one final time, then let her head fall onto the dirt. I lay there, my face wet with tears I didn't realize had come. The cub mewed and pressed against its mother's neck, pawing at her ear. But she didn't move again. I reached out and gathered the tiny creature into my arms. It didn't fight. It didn't cry. It just curled up against my chest, trembling. I sat there on the ground for what felt like hours, holding that cub, listening to the silence of the forest around me, feeling the warmth of its fragile little body against mine. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't walk away. Not after what she just asked of me. The cub didn't leave my chest all morning. I carried it inside, wrapping it in an old flannel shirt, and sat down at my kitchen table. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone when I tried to call someone for help. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed on Steve's name. He was the only vet I knew who didn't immediately call wildlife control when something unusual showed up. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Hey Tom, what's up?" I swallowed hard. "Steve, I need you to come over. Now." There was a pause. "Tom, what is it?" It's a lynx. She's hurt bad. Really bad. She has a cub with her." Another pause, longer this time. Then he said quietly, "I'm on my way." I hung up and looked down at the cub in my arms. It was staring at me with wide eyes, its tiny chest rising and falling so fast I could feel its heartbeat against my palm. I stroked its ear with my thumb and tried to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." A loud thump outside made me jump. I turned to the window and saw the mother lynx dragging herself onto the porch. Her front paw was twisted at a sickening angle, and her fur was dark with fresh blood. She let out a low, rumbling growl when she saw me through the glass. I stood frozen. Her eyes burned into mine with such intensity that I felt my knees go weak. She tried to take a step forward, but her leg buckled under her weight. She collapsed onto the porch boards with a heavy thud, panting, her sides heaving with each breath. I set the cub down gently on the couch and stepped outside, hands raised. The smell of blood hit me immediately, coppery and sharp in the crisp morning air. "Easy, easy, girl. I'm not going to hurt you," she snarled, baring her teeth. Her ears flattened against her skull. Every muscle in her body was shaking. I could see now that her entire left side was torn open, probably from a trap or a fight with something bigger. The wound was deep and raw, blood matting the golden fur around it. I took another step closer. She let out a savage hiss, her tail flicking wildly. For a moment, I thought she would lunge, even half dead as she was. I stopped, my hands trembling. Tears burned in my eyes. Please let me help you." She bared her teeth again. Then her head drooped, her chin hitting the wooden boards with a dull knock. Her breathing rattled like stones rolling in a tin can. Her eyes flickered, unfocused. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning. I could hear the cub crying from inside the house, high and desperate. Then I heard tires crunching on gravel. Steve's old truck pulled into the drive. He climbed out quickly, grabbing his kit from the passenger seat. His eyes widened when he saw the lynx on my porch. "Jesus Christ, Tom, you weren't kidding." He approached slowly, crouching down beside her. She tried to lift her head to snarl at him, but it fell back to the boards with a thud. He turned to me, his face grim. "This is bad, really bad. Can you save her?" He hesitated. His eyes moved over the wounds, the twisted paw, the way her breathing was coming in harsh, shallow gasps. "I don't know. We can try to sedate her and stitch her up, but what? But she's too far gone. Even if I stop the bleeding, there's internal damage. She's bleeding out inside, Tom." I felt my stomach twist. Steve reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. The kindest thing might be to let her go. I shook my head violently. No, there has to be something." Steve looked at me, his eyes soft with pity. "I'll do what I can, but be prepared." He opened his kit and began pulling out gauze and syringes. The lynx tried to snarl again when he touched her side, but her body went limp. Her breathing hitched, then steadied into a shallow, almost silent rasp. Steve glanced at me, shaking his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Tom." I turned away, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes to stop the tears. Inside, the cub was still crying. Its tiny voice pierced through me like a blade. Outside, the morning was bright and cold. The birds kept singing in the pines, unaware that death was sitting on my porch. Steve worked in silence. His hands moved quickly, but his eyes said everything. He was trying to keep her alive, but hope was slipping through his fingers like water. I knelt beside him, stroking her paw lightly. Her breathing was ragged. Each inhale rattled deep in her chest, and every exhale came out as a soft whimper. She didn't have the strength to lift her head anymore. The cub's cries from inside grew louder, more desperate. I could hear its tiny claws scratching at the window. I wanted to bring it out, to let her see it one last time, but Steve stopped me with a look. "She's in pain, Tom. Don't make her try to get up again." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Her fur was so soft under my fingertips, softer than I ever imagined a wild animal could feel. She let out a low, choking sound, and her paw twitched against the boards. I whispered to her, my voice breaking, "It's okay. You did so good. Your baby's safe. I promise I'll take care of them." Her breathing grew shallower, each gasp shorter than the last. Steve injected something into her side. I didn't ask what it was. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy and dim. For a moment, she looked right at me, right through me. Then she turned her gaze to the cub crying behind the glass door. Her ear flicked once, barely a twitch. Slowly, with the last of her strength, she dragged her head across the porch boards until her muzzle rested against my knee. Her whiskers brushed my skin. She let out one final shaky breath and went still. I don't remember crying like that in years. My chest heaved with silent sobs, tears dripping onto her fur. Steve put a hand on my shoulder but didn't say anything. After a while, he stood and began packing his kit. "I'll call Fish and Wildlife," he said quietly. "No, Tom. No, Steve. Please. Just give me tonight. Please." He looked at me, then at the lifeless lynx, and finally nodded. "One night. But they'll come tomorrow." I nodded without looking up. My hands were buried in her thick ruff, feeling the fading warmth under her chin. When Steve left, I carried her cub out onto the porch. The little one mewed softly, sniffing at its mother's fur, pawing at her ear. It curled up against her chest, nuzzling for milk it would never find. I sat down beside them and pulled the cub into my lap. The air grew colder as the sun dipped behind the trees. The sky turned purple and gold, and the first stars began to blink through the darkness. I stayed there until long after the forest went silent, holding the cub in my arms, feeling its tiny heartbeat against my chest. Finally, I stood up and carried it inside. That night, I laid the cub on a folded blanket next to my bed. It cried until it fell asleep, a small trembling ball of fur pressed against my pillow. I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to its shallow breaths, thinking about the mother lynx outside, thinking about what would happen tomorrow. Just before dawn, I heard tires on gravel. Flashing lights danced across my ceiling. I sat up and looked out the window. 2 trucks were parked at the end of my drive. One had police written across the side. The other was from animal control. They were here for the cub. The knock on my door came just as I was pouring hot water over instant coffee. I jumped, spilling it across the counter. The cub startled awake in his blanket nest on the couch, his wide blue eyes darting around the room. I set down the kettle with shaking hands and walked to the door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 shapes outside. Police. My stomach dropped. I opened the door slowly. Cold morning air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. 2 officers stood there. One was a tall woman with dark hair tied back in a severe ponytail. The other, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, stood behind her with a clipboard tucked under his arm. Parked at the curb was an animal control truck, engine humming low. Steam curled from its exhaust into the pale dawn light. "Mr. Thompson?" The woman officer's voice was calm but firm. "Yeah, that's me." She glanced past my shoulder. "We received a call about a wild animal on your property." I didn't need to look to know who called. Across the street, old Mrs. Keenan stood at her window in a pink robe, arms folded tight over her chest. Even from here, I could see the disgust on her face. The cub let out a small, frightened squeak from the couch. I turned, my heart clenching, and scooped him up into my arms. His tiny claws hooked into my flannel shirt as he buried his nose under my chin. The officer's eyes widened. Is that a lynx cub?" "Yes, ma'am. His mother, she died last night." "Sir, I understand this is emotional, but you can't keep a wild animal in your home. It's dangerous, both for you and the animal. We'll be taking him to a licensed wildlife rescue." "No." She blinked. "Excuse me?" I shook my head. "No, please. His mother brought him to me. She trusted me with him. I can't just let you take him away." The heavy-set man stepped forward. He wore thick leather gloves that reached his elbows, and his name tag read Carl. He spoke softly, almost kindly. "Sir, I know this is hard, but lynx are predators. Even as babies, they have instincts. They belong with trained wildlife staff." "He's just a baby," I snapped, my voice shaking. "Look at him. He's terrified. You think locking him in some cold metal cage with strangers poking him with needles is better than this?" The officer stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Thompson, please don't make this harder. We're trying to help." I looked down at the cub. His tiny ears twitched against my neck. I could feel his heartbeat, rapid and frantic. Memories slammed into me. A sterile hospital room, the beep of machines, the smell of antiseptic and fear. My wife's broken sobs. My son's tiny chest rising and falling, then falling for the last time. My throat closed. I held the cub tighter. The animal control worker moved forward, raising his catch pole. "Sir, please, don't do this. We don't want to hurt it. Let me take him." "No, Tom," the woman officer said gently, reaching for my arm. "No," I shouted, louder than I meant to. The cub let out a terrified cry, digging his claws deeper into my shirt. Tears burned behind my eyes. My whole body shook with rage and fear. The officers froze. The woman raised her hands, palms out. Okay, Mr. Thompson. Let's all calm down." I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest heaved with silent sobs. "Please, just let me keep him for today. Just today. He's lost everything. He needs someone. I can be that someone." The woman looked back at her partner. He sighed and lowered his catch pole, glancing at the cub with pity. "One day, sir. But tomorrow we'll be back. If you refuse again, we'll involve fish and wildlife." and their protocols aren't as gentle as ours. I nodded, pressing my cheek to the cub's soft fur. Thank you. They turned and walked down the steps. I watched them leave, holding the cub tight against my chest. Across the street, Mrs. Keenan still stood glaring at me through her window, shaking her head in disgust. I closed the door and sank to the floor, my back against the wood, the cub trembling in my arms. It's okay, little one, I whispered into his fur. I'm not going to let anyone take you away. He mewed softly, curling into a tight ball in my lap. Outside, the morning sun rose higher, filling my small living room with golden light. But all I felt was a growing, gnawing dread in my chest. I didn't know how to fight them, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't lose another child. Not again. I woke up before dawn, though I hadn't really slept. Every hour I checked the cub, making sure he was warm enough, that his tiny chest kept rising and falling. Around 4, he woke up crying for his mother, his high desperate mewls cutting into the silence like a blade. I held him against my chest, rocking back and forth on the edge of my bed, whispering words I didn't even know I remembered. Songs I used to hum to my son when he was little. Songs I never thought I'd sing again. As the sky turned pale gray, headlights flashed through my window. I peered out between the blinds and saw 2 news vans pulling up to the curb. Their logos glowed in the early light. Reporters climbed out with cameras slung over their shoulders, rubbing their hands together against the cold morning air. I felt my stomach twist. News traveled fast in this town, and a dying lynx with her baby was the kind of story that got people talking. I wrapped the cub in a clean towel and set him gently in the basket by the couch. He mewed, blinking at me with sleepy blue eyes. I stroked his head. I'll be right back, little one. Stay here where it's warm. He let out a small sigh and curled up, his tiny body still trembling as he drifted back to sleep. I stepped outside, pulling my old canvas jacket tight around my shoulders. The air was sharp with pine and morning frost. Reporters turned when they saw me. One of them, a young man with a microphone, hurried forward. Mr. Thompson, is it true you found a lynx on your porch yesterday? Yeah, I said softly, my voice rough from lack of sleep. She was dying. She brought her cub to me. How did it happen? I shook my head, staring out toward the tree line where the sun was just beginning to rise. I don't know. She trusted me. She knew she wouldn't make it. She wanted me to keep him safe. The reporter nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. Behind him, another journalist raised her camera and snapped photos of my porch, the faded boards stained with old blood that I hadn't had the heart to scrub away yet. Sir, what are you planning to do with the cub now? Animal control said they'd be back today. I clenched my fists in my pockets. I don't know, but I'm not letting him go without a fight. There was a long silence. The camera shutters clicked. Birds called softly from the pines. The morning felt heavy around us. Then, from deep in the trees, I saw a movement. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, shadows shifting as the sun rose. But then I saw them. 3 lynx, their bodies low to the ground, watching us from between the trunks. Their eyes glowed golden in the dawn. One was massive, with thick winter fur still clinging to her shoulders. Another was smaller, leaner, with scars across his nose. The third was just a little bigger than the cub inside, still gangly with youth. They didn't move closer. They just watched. The reporters didn't notice. They were still aiming their cameras at my porch, asking questions I didn't hear. My chest tightened. I wondered if they were her family, if they knew what had happened, if they were waiting for me to bring him out. A breeze shifted through the trees, carrying their scent across the yard. It was wild and sharp, tinged with blood and pine needles. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. One of the lynx let out a low, guttural call, a sound that vibrated through the cold morning air. The cub inside the house answered with a thin, high-pitched cry. The reporters turned at the sound. Is that the cub? I nodded slowly. Yeah, that's him. Are you going to bring him out here? I didn't answer. I just kept staring at the lynx in the trees. Their eyes locked with mine, unblinking. Waiting. Watching. Finally, the largest one turned and melted back into the forest, the other 2 following close behind. The branches closed around them, leaving only silence in their wake. The young reporter cleared his throat awkwardly. So what will you do now? I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes were wide and earnest, full of questions he didn't even know how to ask. I don't know, I said softly, but I think it's up to him now. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door against the cold and the noise and the questions. The cub lifted his head when he saw me, letting out a soft cry. I picked him up, pressing his tiny body against my chest. His fur smelled like pine and milk and something wilder that I couldn't name. I carried him to the window and pulled back the curtain. The sun was rising fully now, setting the tops of the pines ablaze with golden light. I pressed my lips to the top of his head. Whatever happens next, little one, we'll face it together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Whether animal control would come with warrants and rifles, or whether the lynx in the forest would come back for him. All I knew was that he wasn't just hers anymore. He was mine too.